ISO FileMaker Magazine, the professional's resource for FileMaker know-how. Well, hello, and welcome back to yet another FileMaker tutorial video where we are learning more about FileMaker Pro. My name is Matt Petrowski, bringing you these FileMaker tutorials over at my website, FileMakerMagazine.com. In this video tutorial, we're taking a look at using BaseElements for REST. We're basically going to be connecting to a web service using the free BaseElements plugin. Now, if you've heard about the topics of REST and JSON and XML, posting, getting, all of these things deal with basically communicating to a web service. That is, in this case, communicating out of FileMaker to a web service to get some type of results, bring them back into FileMaker, and then parse them out. Then further to that, because you're working in FileMaker, if you wish to manipulate and modify the data in FileMaker, oftentimes because it's easier, you then want to push that information back up to the web service. So what we're going to cover in this video is we're just going to cover the connecting aspect, not learning a full API, but basically how do you even get FileMaker connected so that it can use REST? That's what we're going to be taking a look at. Let's look at the file. All right, the first place that we need to start is you need the BaseElements plugin. And fortunately, the BaseElements plugin is available in both Macintosh and Windows. Although looking at the screen right here, I do see that the Windows is a 32-bit version. I don't know if they have a 64-bit, which is maybe required. I don't know if they've been updated. Actually, I'm misreading that. Mac version is both, and Windows is both. You can get a 32, but you can also get a 64-bit version as well. In most cases, you'll want the 64-bit version. So what you're going to need to do is install that FileMaker plugin. If you've not installed FileMaker plugins before, then you're going to need to search for that information. Essentially, once you're in FileMaker, which I'm going to switch to now, when you go up to the preferences, which in this case, FileMaker's preferences are going to be here in the FileMaker menu. In Windows, they're going to be under the File menu. You want to go to the Plugins section, and what you're looking for is right there, BaseElements. When I select that, I can see that I have version 3.2 installed. Now this video, really, there's one feature in here, or one function call in the BaseElements plugin that I'm going to use where 3.1 is required. So if your copy of BaseElements isn't working, make sure and go into the preferences and check that the plugin is the correct version. Now, one of the things they have that's a nice enhancement, it's not in older versions such as FileMaker 12, 13, 14. It may be in 14, but it's definitely here in 15 as of the shooting of this video. We have this nice option right here to reveal the plugin folder. In fact, I'll go ahead and do that really quickly. As that comes up on screen, I'll bring that here in the window. And what happens is it opens up a path, and I have my Macintosh turned on so that you can see the full path of how things actually work. Let me zoom back out here and then zoom back in. It's showing my full path down to the folder. Now, the application support here on the Macintosh, we're going to find the FileMaker folder, but in this case, it's installing it within the FileMaker Pro Advanced. If you don't happen to know this, I'm going to go up a couple of levels in the directory here, up to the actual FileMaker folder, so that you can see how I have my plugins set up. This is what you want to recognize about this particular situation. Many times, FileMaker, I believe in FileMaker version 13 or 14, started to install their plugins within version-specific folders in a folder representative of what you're using in terms of FileMaker. Here I'm using FileMaker Pro Advanced, clearly. But if I was using FileMaker Pro, it would read just FileMaker Pro. And you can see that it has 12, 13, 14, and 15, and that it would normally install into the version-specific folder into a folder called Extensions. If you don't happen to know this, there is another place where you can install things, and that is in the Extensions folder that is outside of the actual version of the file of FileMaker Pro that you're using. And what happens here is this folder is actually searched, it searches here first, then it'll search here. But if a plugin is in the extensions folder general, not within a specific version, it becomes available to all versions. So that's a really nice way if you're a developer in order to use all of these. You You can see I've got all of these different plugins in here, some of my favorite, etc. But the one that we're using is the BaseElements plugin, our freely available plugin. So as I zoom out here and we close that, and you make sure that you've got that plugin, once that's installed, what you're most interested in is you're interested in making the connection from FileMaker to the web service. Now, in order to do that, most every web service is going to require that you register on that web service. So as I switch over here, the web service that I'm going to work with is Vimeo. Vimeo is where I'm now hosting my videos out of. It's a nice service. It allows you to lock down videos if you get a pro account so that they can only be displayed on a certain domain. But the very first thing that you're going to need to do is you're going to need to create an account. In order to use their developer API, they have to have an account for you, so it's just a standard Vimeo account. So if you're going to follow along because of this video, and you already have a Vimeo account, or you have clients that are going to be doing something with video and they want to put that onto their website, but they want to manage it via FileMaker, then you're going to need to create an account for that client, and then we're going to walk through the process of actually being able to connect to the web service. All right. So here's what I've done. I've logged into my Vimeo account, and this account happens to be tied to an account that I have for FileMaker themes. There's only one video in here. In order to connect to Vimeo, we now need to establish our developer credentials through Vimeo so that Vimeo knows, okay, when this particular application is connecting to me as a service, I need to know who it is that's actually connecting. Now, most of the time when you're connecting to a web service, whether it's Google Apps, whether it's Twitter, Vimeo, you name it, any web service, Facebook, that has an API, that API is typically going to require that you have the account so that they know who's connecting. But the way that it works is most of these services are expecting that an account is going to be an application that's going to be connecting to their service on behalf of another user. That's not our situation here with FileMaker. We are creating a dedicated connection where our dedicated application is connecting to the Vimeo service for our purposes only. We are not connecting on behalf of another user. In other words, we're not creating a FileMaker application that we're now going to give to 5,000, 10,000 other people and let those 10,000 people connect to their own Vimeo accounts. If that was the case, then we would be using a technology for the purpose of authentication called Oauth. Now, Oauth is pretty much your standard method of authenticating, okay, can this web application connect to, or this FileMaker application, or any application, connect to this service, Vimeo? First, I need to make sure that this user is who they say they are. I'm going to have them log in, and I'm going to pass back something known as a token. That token is what's used as the authorization credentials for all future requests. But in our particular case, we need just a fixed token value, something that we can use on an ongoing basis. So what I did is I created a short little video called Vimeo FileMaker Connect, which you can see right here, and I uploaded that to Vimeo. So in the file that you're going to have access to, you're going to need to pause this video at this point. You're then going to be able to play and watch the Vimeo Connect video in the sample file, which I'll probably put somewhere right here in this example file, so that you can see how you actually set up your credentials. Now, I'll walk you through it really quickly here if you're not going to take the time to go watch the video. Essentially, there is a developer API, which let's go ahead and scroll all the way to the top here, and let's look at My Apps. This is what the Vimeo UI is going to look like. We have the API, which is all of the information you need about all of the different places that you can connect to in this web service, Vimeo, and these are called endpoints. But before I can connect to anything, I obviously need to authorize or get the credentials. Since I'm not using Oauth, what ends up happening is this section right here, My Apps, is where you actually create a new app. In fact, you can see right here, we've got this Create New App. And that's what the little video is going to be about. But basically, here is my application right here. And then it's this area of authentication that you're going to use, and that's where you're going to get this token that I'm talking about. It's the super secret token that we can see right here. And the video is going to give you a lot more information. Now, if you put an application out into the wild and all of a sudden, for some reason, you forgot to secure and lock down this super secret private token and somebody gets hold of it, that's when you do what's called a revocation. You would delete this token, but of course that would break all instances of your FileMaker application being able to connect to the web service. But if it's for a specific client, you're really only worried about the 1 or 2 instances where the FileMaker database is hosted. So it's really no big deal. You just delete the token, you get a new one, and then you put that new token in. I'm going to show you how to secure that token so that it really can't be used unless it's a high level of access. Basically, down here at the bottom, you're going to generate your token with the degree of privileges that you're going to allow. And that additional video that I referenced that'll be in the sample file is what you want to watch if everything that I just mentioned doesn't make sense. So that's what's going to be in that little video. And from this point, we're going to walk through the process after we've got the authentication taken care of actually making the connection. Now remember, all the information that we have up at the top here, this is all information that's used for the process of OAuth. And you really have to look through the API documentation of whatever web service you're trying to connect to, whether it's Facebook, Twitter, Vimeo, or Google. Google in particular has a lot of documentation. You have to find out what type of authentication method you're going to use. After all of the authentication is taken care of, that's when you get into the good stuff, and that's actually making the requests for data, bringing it back into FileMaker, parsing it out, and then doing whatever else you want, updating it, for example. So let's take a look at that. All right, so first let's get through all of the confusing stuff that you feel like there's a ton of stuff that you have to learn, and in order to be able to do REST within FileMaker, you're going to have to know a bunch of stuff. Well, that's not true. REST can be as easy as it is to load a web page, because that's exactly what REST is. When you're making a request to a web server, you're simply going out to that web server and saying, hey, can you give me what's at this particular URI? So they call this a URI, but we often reference it as a URL. At the end of this URL is all of this content that we see. Whether that content comes from a file that's on a hard disk or whether it comes from the back end of a database, that's what actually is the result of what we're trying to get. Now, in the world of REST, this URI is what's known as an endpoint. The endpoint is basically going to give you the results based on your request. Now, your request can be any number of things. It can be a request to simply just get something. Get being, I want to get the data that you have at this endpoint. A post, on the other hand, is I want to post something up to this URL. So you can see right here in Wikipedia where I've gone to the entry for representational state transfer, which is basically what REST stands for. You can see these items right in here, these verbs: get, post, put, and delete. So all of these are basically just the different methods that you can actually call to a web server. Now, when you call to a web server, in most cases, you're using a get. When you're actually typing information into a form and you're going to push that form up to the website, that is typically done through what's known as post. If you're going to modify something that already exists, then that is typically handled through a put. Delete is pretty obvious, and then they have one other called patch. And there actually may be others that I'm unaware of, but these are the most common in terms of the methods of what type of transfer you're going to do between an application and a server, or the service. So in this case, our application quite obviously is FileMaker. That makes sense. So we're going to either get, post, put, delete, or patch. Here's the big problem. FileMaker, its internal insert from URL, as of this recording in FileMaker 15, only really knows how to do these two out of all of the possible ones that are necessary. If you're going to interact with Vimeo, say for example, and you want to modify a particular video, let's say for example, from FileMaker, I want to rename this video from Vimeo FileMaker Connect to something completely different, FileMaker natively by itself cannot do that. If I just wanted to get information about the video, if I only wanted to get, using the get method, the name, the duration, the size of this video, I can do that because FileMaker's insert from URL, we're talking about this one right here. There are no scripts in this file yet, but we will put insert from URL. This particular script step supports the two that I've actually referenced, get and post. But anytime that you want to go beyond that in FileMaker 15 or lower, you're going to need to actually use a plugin. That's where BaseElements comes into play. The BaseElements plugin is what allows you to go beyond the get and the post only and be able to do put, patch, and delete. So these operations are critical if you're going to be interacting with a web service where you need more than just simple data retrieval or submitting new items. If you need to be able to modify items and delete items, then you'll definitely need the BaseElements plugin. So I'll go ahead and delete this script because there are no scripts in this file. Also, we'll save it, then we'll delete it and close that out. So what I want to point out to you is BaseElements as a plugin allows you to make calls to a web service, and it does this completely within the context of FileMaker code. In other words, you recognize that I do not need a FileMaker, I don't need a script in order to actually get data back from Vimeo. Now, I've already wired things up at this point, and when I click execute, what you're going to see is that information is going to come back. In fact, if I show the data viewer right now, what you're going to see is that I've gotten back a number of items within these global variables. Now, all of this code was all executed in one place, and it happened within a single step on a button. In fact, I'm giving you the code that I use whenever I'm going to make a REST call because it's very nice to have all of that code very concise and in one place. It's not spread across a bunch of different places on FileMaker, it's in one place. Now here's what happened as a result of this. I made a request to Vimeo. I provided it with authentication information, that is the secret token, and I asked for it to give me back my videos. Here is the response that came back. But like all things, when you're going to transfer something from one place to another, you basically need to say what it is that you want, where it's going to, and what you expect back. These are things that are known as headers. Headers in the world of communication between an application or between a browser, between anything that's going to request something from a server, you basically have all of these little pieces of information that says, here's what I'm looking for, here's where I want to get it from, and here's how I'd like to get it. So the here's what I'm looking for is I'm looking for a response of HTML, or I'm looking for a response of XML, or I'm looking for a response of JSON. Now, most web services work based on JSON, and JSON is just a formatted structure that came out of JavaScript that's a little bit easier to read than XML. In fact, we can see some of it right here. This is a JSON response. And if you're going to be doing web services, you inevitably are going to be using JSON. Now, a response code is basically just it's like a thumbs up. In the world of the web, if you haven't seen it before, you're typically, when you go to a URL, if it doesn't load the page, it shows you a page that's known as a 404. A 404 page basically means I didn't find this. You made a request from the server asking for something. It came back with a response, and that response was, hey, I didn't find it. That means I didn't find it. I'm going to give you a 404. The response that you typically want is a 200. A 200 response means okay. Now, if you want to know more about the responses, there are 200s, 300s, 400s, and 500s. You're going to want to look up HTTP response codes in Google search or something like that, and you'll see all of the different types of responses that a server can give back. Now, when we're working with REST in FileMaker, we're interested in the fact that we need to know what the response code is. Did we successfully get back what we were looking for, or did we get an error? Did we get a 404 and it didn't find what we were looking for? Now, when we're using the BaseElements plugin, the BaseElements plugin is actually working off of a technology that is long, well proven. In fact, FileMaker even has this technology baked into it. It just doesn't have it fully exposed. It's called curl. Curl is a library that's actually used in order for two different servers to connect and communicate with each other. BaseElements means that you need to learn a little bit about curl in order to make a connection request to a web service in order to get information back and look at the headers. Now, the headers go in both directions. They go in terms of these are the headers of the request that I'm making, and these are the headers that I'm getting in response. When I double click and open up and look at this, you're going to see a lot of the different headers. And the headers are all returned based on the request that you make to the web service. And these headers can be either meaningless to you and useful only to the service that provides them, or it's something that you want to know about when you get the information back. So, for example, I can tell that Vimeo is running an Nginx server. I can see that the content type that they're replying back is their own Vimeo.video in a JSON format. I can see whether or not this was a cache item. There was no cache that was returned to me, or it's telling me not to cache it, basically, and it's saying what the maximum age is of this response in milliseconds, I believe. I've got strict transport security. I've got the last time that it was modified. I've got a lot of X headers, which are basically information that the service provider uses. I can see that Varnish is a front-end proxy that they're using. There's an expiration date. All of these headers, one of them in particular that's important is content length. I can see I got 5,024 bytes back. It tells me what the range is, that it is in bytes. The reason that all of these become important to you is because if you're ever going to work with and debug a web service and something's not working the way that you want it to work, you need to be able to not only see these headers, but you also need to be able to see a log of what happened as you made the connection. Because if you, as you know, you work in FileMaker, you need to be able to debug. When you create something, you create it with the intention that it's going to work as you expect. It almost never does, and then you have to debug and refine the process. It's the exact same thing as if you were a sculptor. You start with a giant block of stone, and then you have to refine until you ultimately end up with the solution that you want. Nothing is immediate. All of these headers that are coming back as a result of the code that I'm going to show you really quickly. Now, there's one other item that's very important when you're working with web services, and it is a new feature, and it's why I needed to tell you that you need BaseElements 3.1. This a curl trace output. This is output of what curl actually did when you called the BaseElements plugin. It's a send and receive in terms of every step of what's going on. In fact, you can see right here, it gives you the full breakdown. I'm trying this IP address, which is where the API, the Vimeo API is, right there. I made a secure connection using this secure algorithm right here. It's a 256 algorithm that I connected. This is the server certificate I used. They have a wildcard certificate. It was issued from DigiCert. I wanted to get this endpoint, which is this URI, Vimeo HTTPS api.vimeo.com, and then this remaining fragment right here. I hit this host. The user agent that I told Vimeo that's actually connecting to it as a service is libcurl agent BaseElements plugin with the version right here. So what happens is when the server is actually connected, that connection ends up being logged. So on the Vimeo servers, there is a log right now that says, hey, there's this agent called libcurl BaseElements plugin that actually connected to me. Now, everything in the world of web services and internet connections, everything can be modified and changed. So a lot of the times you find services that will actually spoof this and change it to make it look like, hey, I'm a copy of an iPhone and I connected in order to get to the service. The funny thing is, they have to write things that actually look for, okay, is this iPhone actually connecting and making thousands of connections within the same second? That's when you get a lot of hacker stuff going on. So this trace call, right, or this trace stack right here is really important to us because it allows us to see all of the things that happened in terms of our connection. We see everything that went on, and this is how we can debug things. We need to know how to access this. Now, all of our response right here that actually came back, these receive datas, is what we ultimately end up with in terms of putting back into our FileMaker field. Once we get the data back into the field, the whole following process is dealing with JSON and how we want to parse that out. That's going to be beyond the scope of this video, but I'll be creating other videos in a series that you will be able to learn about that JSON, probably as a separate set of videos available for purchase. In this video, we're only interested in the connection, and the final part that I'm going to show you is the code that you can use in order to use the BaseElements plugin to connect to the web service. So the first critical thing that you need to understand about implementing BaseElements or anything where you're contacting a web service is that you always need to protect your secrets. Your secrets being your authentication tokens that you use or that your application uses in order to connect. Now, if I was to distribute this particular FileMaker file, and I was to let people have it out on Go, the token that I get from Vimeo, from the developer part where I create my application, is something that I want to protect at all costs. I need to put this in FileMaker so that it is securely stored somewhere. Now, there's only a few places in FileMaker that you can do this, and even when you do it within FileMaker, you need to know that a FileMaker file, if you distribute it, can be hacked unless you remove and strip all admin privileges. So the first thing is we're going to go to the File, we're going to go to Manage, and look at our custom functions. Now, within our custom functions, you're going to find a function that is Vimeo Access Token. So here is a FileMaker function that is set to return my secret Vimeo function. In fact, you can see it ends right here with 93C. And as I zoom out and we look right down here at the bottom, C93C, that is my secret token. In order to fully protect this, you can see that the availability at the bottom of this function has been set from the all accounts to the only accounts assigned full access privileges. Now the trick here is in this file, the way that I'm using this code is I'm using it directly on a button. In most implementations, you're going to be using a script. That script is going to be something like Vimeo REST call, and maybe you have the data if you're going to post something to that effect. But you're going to select on that script, which in that script, one of the steps will be, say, for example, set variable, whatever you're passing as your data, and the value might be, or would include, Vimeo Access Token. Now that Vimeo Access Token, let's just call it token here for short, that Vimeo Access Token will not be accessible to this script unless this script has the highest level of access, and that would be full access. So I would need to, after I save the script, right-click on the script and choose this option for this script only to basically grant full access privileges. So that means for this script only, I'm going to allow this script to run as if it was the admin account, therefore being able to access the admin result of that custom function, Vimeo Access Token. The one thing that we now need to prevent is that if somebody got physical access to this file, we would need to prevent them from hacking into this file and getting full access admin access. If it's hosted on FileMaker server, then you're pretty much assured that if your server is locked down, a user can't transfer the file off of FileMaker server. If, however, you're going to distribute this file using the separation model to a FileMaker copy of FileMaker Go or a custom app, you need to do one thing. You need to use FileMaker Advance, use the developer utilities, and you're going to, after you've added the file, which I'll do right now, let's add my JSON custom functions since I can't actually add the file. You'll have to select this option right here under Solution Options. After I click this, of this option right here, remove admin access from files permanently. Now, if you're going to do this to the file, you have to give yourself a backdoor if you need to be able to export and import data. But this is the only way that you can truly lock down and secure a secret key within FileMaker. You have to make it so that the admin access isn't even on the file in order to actually secure it. Now, of course, you cannot use database encryption on a file if you're going to distribute that file to multiple different devices unless you're going to expect that the users will actually be able to use the password. And this is a separate password, the database encryption, beyond the password to actually get into the file. So the user would ultimately have to end up two passwords. Not very ideal. So I consider this the best preventative measure is setting the custom function with the token, making sure that only the admin account can access it, making a script with admin access that can then access that particular custom function, and then removing the admin access from the file. That's the only way that I will distribute a FileMaker file with some type of secret embedded within it. So now that I've explained the security and the authentication aspect, we can finally take a look at the code that's actually making the call. So here we go with learning the actual code that's making the call through the BaseElements plugin. Now, typically, I will integrate this into a series of a bunch of different script steps or scripts that are dedicated to the different methods that you have in order to connect to a web service and get things out. But all of the code comes from a snippet that I have. In fact, as I type down right here, you'll see that what I do is I will type in fm rest, and it will expand out some boilerplate code that I use that I know can be used on something as simple as a refresh object. So for example, if I back out here, out of my objects, without having to create any scripts, this is the process that I use in order to implement a REST call really quickly. First, I want to have the code very compact and portable, which is that snippet that I use. I want to be able to get a response without actually using a field. In order to do that, I simply use a text block right here. You can see that the text block itself is actually returning a merge variable. That means within the code itself, I'm going to put the result of my request into a global variable. Beyond that, I can push it into any field if I want. But initially, I like the opportunity of just being able to get the response into a global variable, not necessarily relying on the dependency of a field. So here we can see on the execute, when I double click, I am using simply a single step, and it is a refresh object. The object that I am obviously going to refresh is the variable that I am merging right here into a block of text. So when we look at this code, we can break it down, and I'll go through it piece by piece. We'll make this really wide, and we'll go through this. So first off, if you haven't used let functions are extremely powerful, especially if you format them in a way that your code is pretty readable. So let's start up at the top. First off, I have my initial let statement that says I'm going to need to declare some things. And the first thing that I'm going to declare is the result. Where is the result actually going to go? Well, in this case, the result object is going to be that text object that is it's the result of my global variable, my global merge variable that we just took a look at. So I need the name of that object. Well, I named the object text.rest.response. Next, there are multiple different calls that I can make. Remember, I can make a get, a post, a put, a patch, or a delete. Now, a get is typically only going to require a URL. A post, on the other hand, is going to require what's known as a payload. A payload is obviously what is it that you're pushing up to the server. If I'm creating a new video on Vimeo or a new document on Google Docs or a new tweet on Twitter, I'm pushing data up typically via post. Now again, FileMaker handles both get and post, but it won't do patch or put, which you need in order to modify. So the payload can be identified as coming from a field or coming from anywhere. In this case, I'm using the same format that I use many times with, say, for example, XML. I will reference that and put a block of text on the layout, which is pre-formatted XML, which many times just merges the values directly from fields into that content. And that's what I like to do in terms of my implementation. If you like to use fields, this can definitely just simply reference a field. Next we have is our endpoint. The endpoint is the URI according to the API of the service that you're accessing that you need to hit. In this case, I'm actually pulling this from a field. It's a field that I called endpoint. Now, if I was to hard code, I could have just hard coded it right here, but that's what I did. Now, in this case, because I'm showing you this file as a developer, and I know that you're opening it with admin full access, the function that returns the authentication token is this one, Vimeo access token. And I need to establish a variable for that, the auth. I also can support multiple different methods, of course. Now, the method, our two most common, get and post, can be done with insert from URL. And again, put, patch, and delete are available in BaseElements, but you need to set a specific header. Remember that discussion I had about headers, where there's both request headers that you need to set, and there's also response headers that you get back from the server. And these headers are very important because if you aren't explicit in terms of what you want and how you want it and where you want it from, you'll never get what you want in terms of interacting with the web service. So the next thing that we have is just a large case statement. And that case statement allows you the opportunity to check for prerequisites prior to actually executing via the BaseElements plugin. These prerequisites start off with a not pattern count. So if I'm going to attach this code to a button with a single step, then the first thing I need to say is, if the installed plugins don't include BaseElements, I can't even run this. So what you're going to put into the output is, please download and install the BaseElements plugin. Next, if the method is a post method, and I have an empty payload, which is what this is essentially asking for right here. It's saying, if is empty, my expected payload, which in this case, the payload is coming from a text object. Yours could be coming from a field. Yours would say, if is empty, the field contents or whatever. Then what I want to do is I want to set the response to, I'm missing the payload. I can't post it. Basically, all of the conditions within this case statement are all of the prerequisites that must be met before you actually send off the code using BaseElements. You can see that right here I had, for example, an is empty. I've commented it out right here that says if a particular field was missing, and this is just left over from the code that I was using, missing email for customer. So this was a post query that I was sending to, I believe, the authorized.net web service that I use for processing credit cards. Finally, after all of your prerequisites have been met, we get to the final part, which is the default operation for our case statement. The default operation is to send via get or post or any of the other methods via the BaseElements plugin what we're actually looking for from the web service. And here's where we get into setting the headers. So as I zoom out and zoom back in, here's what happens. This is all of the default right here of the case statement. This default basically says, what is the URL that I want to hit, or it could be URI. That's going to be the endpoint that I've specified up at the top. The post contents would be pulling from wherever I need to pull that content. That could come from a field. In my case, I like to oftentimes use getLayoutObjectAttribute. The headers are what I'm going to pass as my request headers to the web service. So in the case of Vimeo, the way that they are actually going to authorize, if you're not using Oauth, or even if you are using Oauth, Vimeo, the web service, needs to know what is this service coming from, or what is this request coming from in terms of who are all of my registered applications. Well, when we initially registered our application with the Vimeo service, and it gave us a token, and that token is set up in the top part, a header needs to be passed to the server. The header is an authorization header, and this is the specification according to Vimeo's documentation that says you need to pass in your authorization header something that says bearer than whatever the token is. And remember, this auth is actually pulling from that Vimeo access token custom function. Next, what type of content are you actually looking for as a return result? Are you looking for getting text back, HTML back, XML, or JSON? Most of the time, you're always going to be dealing with JSON or XML when it deals with a web service. So I'm saying, hey, Vimeo servers, the content type that I'm looking for is a result of application/JSON. I want text back that is JSON text. And here you can see, here is a different type, text/XML, with a character set of, in this case, UTF-8. So that's another type of content type that you can actually request. Now, when it comes to using curl, curl has a very long list of all of the different possible headers that you can supply. Out of those headers, you need to specify what type of submit you're actually going to do. That's because, like I mentioned, FileMaker only supports get and post. It does not support patch. But let's say, using my example, that I want to rename that actual video on Vimeo through FileMaker. Well, in order to do that, I'm going to have to use the patch method. So up at the very top, what we saw was, as I zoom out here, we saw right here what method I actually want this particular request to have. So if I was to change this to the patch method, which would allow me to modify the particular content, what I would get as a result within the headers here that are set for the BaseElements plugin is I would set the curl option of a custom request, and the method would end up being patch. That's how I would actually tell the BaseElements plugin, when we contact Vimeo, you tell Vimeo that what we want to do is we want to update this particular item. We're not wanting to get something or post something. We're wanting to patch or update. Why it isn't update, that's just one of the natures of all of the different HTTP header types or response codes and how things are set up as a result of the evolution of REST. Now, here is the actual call. This is the command that's finally making the call. All of these headers is all of the setup that you need to do in terms of what's going to ultimately be sent to the server. Finally, when we're going to send to the server, we need to determine what the type is. So I use an if statement right here. First off, I say if not is empty, filter values, the method that I'm looking for. In other words, there's two things. I can either request to just get something back, or I can request to send something up. Well, if you're going to request to send something up, you obviously have one additional piece of information. So for a post, put, or a patch, we're going to send that additional information. And that comes in the form of the BaseElements HTTP post. You're going to have the URL, which is your endpoint, and you're going to post whatever it is that you want to send up, modified information or brand new information. If it's not a post, put, or patch, then it's typically going to be a get or a delete. So in that case, we use the function from BaseElements plugin of the BaseElements get URL, and we simply specify our endpoint. And then if it's a successful call to a valid endpoint, our information comes back. Now, when either of these two calls are made, what happens is we get all of the different information that comes back to us, but the only way that we can access that is through additional function calls to the BaseElements plugin. And the things that we want back are the things that we already took a look at. We want the headers using the BE HTTP response headers. We'd also like the response code, because the response code itself allows us to make decisions within our logic. Did we get a 200? Cool, we're successful. Did we get a 404? Well, that's a problem. Maybe I want to throw up a dialog for the user. Some piece of information that they supplied in a field was wrong or invalid. And finally, we have our trace. Now, the trace allows us to look at all of the steps within what curl made as a request. And we really only want to ever show that if the account is full access. So I have a condition here that says if the get account privilege set equals full access, then what we're going to return into that global variable is the BE curl trace. And that's where we can look through all of our log and debug it. If it's not a developer, then we really don't ever want to pass that back in case some rogue developer knows how to actually scrape our global FileMaker variables, which is possible out of memory with a lot of advanced training. So finally, our result of what we want to return, because we're running all of this within the context of a refresh object, is simply the name of the object. So we're simply going to refresh this object, which contains the merge variable, which is our response. And all of that boilerplate code is code that you can use out of this file and either create new scripts or create custom functions that allows you to use the BaseElements plugin to make REST calls to web services. And it's not just Vimeo, but it's any public web service or private web service that allows you to make calls to their API in order to do things with what they provide as a service. So let's wrap this video up. The last thing that you need to know about in terms of communicating and interacting with a web service is you need to know about their API. The API is what comes first in today's modern technology when you're creating a solution or an application. If you're going to create a FileMaker database and that database is going to interact with all of the different web services, if it's a social media integrated feature where you're going to allow tweets to go out and Facebook posts and all kinds of other things, you have to become familiar with the APIs. And that's basically just reading documentation. So here on the Vimeo website at developer.vimeo.com, if you basically click on this one link, full list of APIs, you are going to see all of the information that is necessary in order to use the BaseElements plugin to do pretty much whatever you want. If you control the account and you've set all of your permissions on the token that you created, then everything is accessible. Channels, groups, videos, users, videos, content ratings, languages, information, albums, everything that the web service provides is typically exposed as an endpoint as part of their API. If you need to deal with users and videos or directly with videos, scroll down to the video section. If you need information about a video, it's going to tell you you need to use get, and you're going to pass to the api.vimeo.com, and the endpoint is /videos, the video ID. So if we take a look at our Vimeo video and we click on the video, we can see quite clearly up here in the URL that the ID for this particular video is that value right there. It's 174859798. And as I back out and we go ahead and take a look at our results of actually executing this and it pulling all of the videos from Vimeo, if we go into our REST response and take a look at this, all of this gobbledygook is all formatted as JSON. Now, in order to extract this, you're going to have to put into your FileMaker database the ability to extract content that is in a JSON format. Fortunately for us, this has already been solved, and I'm going to give you the URL where you can go to. Geist Interactive, Dan Smith, and Todd Geist have already created a suite of JSON custom functions that you can find at github.com/geistinteractive/JSON custom functions. These are available within a FileMaker database. You can copy and paste them as custom functions. They use the BaseElements plugins, and they allow you to pull things out. Those things being the results of the IDs of videos that you pulled using your web service, BaseElements, and the API in order to get at the data that you want. And pulling all of that data into FileMaker and parsing all of this data into fields is the next step of evolution in terms of you exploring the APIs and pulling that data out, getting it into fields, manipulating it, and then pushing it back up to the web service so that your modifications are all handled within FileMaker and you get the ease of use that you love and the development environment that makes it so easy. So that is what I have with regards to making a connection using web services and using the BaseElements plugin. I hope this video has given you a lot more insight into what is possible with FileMaker and how you can do this. Bear in mind that everything that I've shown you in this video can also be done with Perform Script on Server. So you can put the BaseElements plugin on a FileMaker web server and have your FileMaker Go clients execute these types of calls as well. But as always, I would like to wish you much luck with your own FileMaker development, and until next time, happy FileMaking.
We hope you've enjoyed this video tutorial, and we'd like to say thank you for your subscription and your support. If you're not already a subscriber, head on over to www.filemakermagazine.com/subscribe for more information about the benefits of joining.